So again, Mrs. Vera Chase, please let's give a hand for Vera. Vera is a published author, as well as she is the president of the Commonwealth Writers of the Bahamas, which I'm a member. I can start coming to meetings real good here. But yes, of course, and she's an excellent resource person. When I call Vera and I say, Vera such and such and such, Vera's given me this much history. I'm like, wait, I'm writing it down. So I'm really, really happy to have her here tonight. She is somewhat of an authority on the Loyalists. So when we thought of this topic, I was like, yes, Vera needs to do this. How long have I been running behind? About a year, right? Yeah, about that. So she's here tonight, and we're extremely happy that she is. I know what she has to say will be very interesting. Some of it you may know, and the rest of it you may never have heard before. Vera is a real research resource person. And okay, you're going to sit or stand? Stand and... Okay, and okay, so I just need someone to... You want to stand? Just be careful up in here. Okay, so please welcome Mrs. Vera Chase. And she's going to bring you her presentation on the Loyalists.
So, the Turnquest, distinguished guests, gentlemen, ladies, students, good evening. It is by the grace of God that I stand before you tonight to discuss a subject I love so much, that is the history of the Bahamas. He has given me connections to seek and to find Loyalist men and women and slaves long forgotten. Special thanks to Mrs. Andrea Munnings, Major, President of this historical society, who invited me to speak tonight, refusing to accept my words of no too busy. Special thanks to Captain Paul Arana, who introduced me to reading headstones in the cemeteries for Loyalist information, and to his deceased relatives who were Loyalists. Special thanks also to historical publication of books, Dr. Gail Saunders, The Loyalists and Slaves, Michael Creighton, The History of the Bahamas, Sandra Riley, Homeward Bound, Whittington B. Johnson, Race Relationship in the Bahamas, Ada Haley, The Life and Key Legacy, also the National Archives of the Bahamas, Mrs. Strong and Mrs. Gray, staff of the Lands and Survey, the Registrar General's Department, Mr. Christopher Thompson from the cemeteries and the Ministry of Works, Department of Works, and historian Dr. Chris Curry, the College of the Bahamas. Also, I went online at Bahamas Genealogy as a group that you must join, the National Archives of Jamaica, the Genealogy of the UK, the Library of Congress, University of Florida Library, Encyclopedia Americana, and the Viney Malone Museum in Hopetown, Abaco. So sit back and relax. Let me take you back several hundred years and find what caused the Revolutionary War in the United States. The citizens of 13 colonies were involved in this war: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Now, what caused the war? What caused this war? A conflict between Britain and its 13 colonies on the Atlantic coast of North America. Situations were bad. Too many taxes, and the British government was slow to recognize the American colonies as a political unit, but rather as King George III's possessions. Problems began to surface between the colonists and Britain after the French and Indian War, when the debts caused by these wars began to rise, and the colonists were expected to pay for them. In the early months of 1763, King George III and the English Parliament also decided there should be an army of 6,000 men in the colonies at all times to police the territory at an additional cost of £350,000 a year to be paid by the colonists. To implement these changes, Britain began to impose a series of taxes to cover these expenses. The Sugar Act of 1764 added taxes to sugar and molasses being imported from the Caribbean. The Stamp Act requiring colonists to purchase stamps for everything: newspapers, playing cards, dice, marriage certificates, birth certificates, act of trade and obligation, stamp tax on everything. Then they had a Currency Act forbidding the people to use paper money. But it was the tax on tea that started the war. The settlers in Boston opposed the taxes on tea being sold by the East India Company, and in 1773, they rushed on board the ships in Boston Harbor, thrust into the sea to prevent the sale of the tea. Now, who were these loyalists? They were colonists who were loyal to Britain during the American War of Independence. They were also called Tories or Royalists. There were some 500,000 American colonists. Some 80 to 60,000 became exiled because of the war. There were outstanding men and women like Peter Harrison of Rhode Island. He was a great American painter and architect of all times. And Thomas Hutchison, historian and governor of Massachusetts. There were Negro slaves, indentured servants, Indians, immigrants, farmers, church members, rich landowners and businessmen, and just a lot of local people. Now, what motivated these people? What motivated the Loyalists? The Loyalists were motivated from financial, some of them had financial gains from Britain. They had royal help from the king. They were inspired by leaders who were also Loyalists. There were people who worked in the military. There were lawyers who engaged in crown business. Merchants who purchased business, whose businesses depended on English trade and favors from the king. They were the king's men. But after the war, that's when the problem started. They were confiscated, large amount of cash were taken, the families were divided, husband against wife and sons against sisters, everybody was divided. They were tarred and feathered. Some of them were hung, they were flogged, they were hung. They were burned in effigy, stripped and driven out of town. And some were even carried around on the dung cart. They were carried around. They were just in disgrace, total disgrace. Now they were the rebels. They called themselves American Whigs, the patriots, or the revolutionaries. They were the ones that were causing all this problem. So the king knew these people were on his side, and he had to do something to help them because they keep writing letters to England telling them that they were loyal, they were faithful. What can they? So what did the king do? He had the Loyalists. Now they didn't walk to Florida, East Florida. They didn't walk to St. Augustine. They were taken in fancy ships and whatever. He took real good care of them. They were taken to Florida. They call it East Florida in the records, but actually I believe it was St. Augustine, where they waited for instructions from the king. Many were reimbursed after their cash losses, given land grants in the Bahamas, the Caribbean, Canada, England, and all over the place where the king could find free land to send them. They had free transportation. Families were relocated, all the furniture, the slaves, everybody, the dog, the cat, everybody were taken in a fancy way to wherever they had to go. Now, what caused Britain to lose this war? Anyway, the war got the message of what they should do. Everything was different. What changed? It took about a couple of weeks for the ship to get from England to the United States, so the war had changed. And secondly, the English people did not know the territory. They did not know the area like the American patriots did. They did not know the area. The patriots had formed an alliance with France, and that's another thing. They were close to France, and the French loyalists, the French people were close with the Americans, and the colonists were divided. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know whether they wanted to be neutral. They didn't know whether they wanted to go with England or whether they wanted to be with the patriots. They were divided. And then that's why they lost the colonist support. British soldiers and the king tried to do all he could to assist them. Everything they wanted, they were able to get from him. He tried his best. Now the loyalists, some of the black loyalists, they were black loyalists also, but most of the black loyalists went to Canada, however, in the Nova Scotia area. But black loyalists also came to the Bahamas, and I found one of the black loyalists that we don't know too much about was Prince William, who started the church on Meekin Street. He came in 1790, and I found some records where also a lot of names in our history to place myself. One of British loyalists from South Carolina, he went to Cat Island. James Bristol's brother was one of the three men, Alexander Bain and William Kerr, elected in 1804 for Abaco. Isaac Ballou, they said he might have been a Huguenot. He was a French loyalist, a businessman, land grant of 300 acres in New Providence, known as Blue Hill Road. Adam Christie, East Florida, a loyalist in New Providence. Brigadier General Robert Cunningham from North Carolina, he was a Scottish-Irish family. Faithful to King George III, he was compensated for his losses and got New Providence. now in dispute. Lake Cunningham belonged to him, was on his property. And the castle that just opened, just cut down the other day for their yeah, the new dog near Arawaki. Yeah, that is said to be his house. He is buried in 1813. His grave is near the wall. His wife, Margaret, and 2 daughters are all buried in one crypt. So I went to the cemetery to make sure that was them. Joseph Curry, sons Joseph, John, Richard, Benjamin, and William Curry from Abaco Green Tea was elected for Long Island. In 1784, he was expelled in 1785 for petitions and protests against the House. Elections in 1784. After the elections in 1784, the American Loyalists and Board of Loyalists, they realized that they had lost their seats because the English government and English settlers cut the boundaries. James Hepburn was the president of the American Board of Loyalists, and when he realized that they had lost their seats, the members were already seated, and he walked off the House of Assembly in 1785, causing a big chaos on Bay Street or wherever it was. He walked out and he took his friends with him, and his friends were James Morse from Crooked Island, George Miller from Andros, the name sound familiar, John Petty from Eleuthera, his brother Hugh Dean was in Abaco. All of them, they walked out of the House of Assembly right out the door, never to return. Stephen Delancey was a French loyalist. He was also a Huguenot family in New York. He became Chief Justice of the Bahamas with Pocahontas Islands. Andrew Devoe Sr., there were 2 Andrew Devoe, not just one. It was 2, father and son. The father was a loyalist, the son was not. But the patriots in North Carolina was treating the father so poorly that the son joined him. And they came together to the Bahamas. In fact, Andrew Devoe Jr. was the one who saved the Bahamas from the Spanish, but I'll get to that later on. Our history is saying that it's one, and the father lived on Cat Island, not the son, because he had 13 children. That's why his house is so big. He had 13 children. The father stayed in the Bahamas, the son went back to New York. Andrew Devoe Sr., French loyalist, a wealthy businessman, father and husband from Beaufort, South Carolina, the father of Colonel Andrew Devoe. He was compensated for his losses. 2,160 acres in Cat Island, including Little Cat Island, Highborn Key, and in New Providence. He had a large family, hence the size of his house. Devoe House on Cat Island is very big. He was eulogized at his funeral as a man of intelligence, extreme service to the community by his knowledge. Andrew Devoe Sr. lived on Cat Island. Andrew Devoe Jr. was one of the finest young soldiers in Beaufort, South Carolina. In the beginning, Andrew was not a loyalist, but because the patriot supporters knew that Andrew Devoe Sr. was our father, and Andrew Devoe Jr. came to his defense. In 1782, when Spain occupied New Providence, it was Colonel Andrew Devoe who formed a small army of soldiers and residents from Abaco, Eleuthera, and Harbor Island to defend the town. They included, first, Captain Wheeler, Captain Romer from Abaco, Captain Samuel Higgs, Captain Joseph Curry from Harbor Island, Captain McKinsey from Eleuthera, also included Major Archibald Taylor, ancestor of Paul Arana. A name of Dummeress. Philip from Boston, former boat captain in the war, traveled to Abaco, later to New Providence as Receiver General and Treasurer. Earl of Dunmore, John Murray, last governor of Virginia, became governor of the Bahamas, was not very popular because of his various schemes to become rich. He gave himself large tracts of land and mismanaged the building of the forts. Getting back to the forts. When he came to New Providence, he said they needed forts. England told him they gave him 4,000 pounds to build one fort. And he kept building and adding more forts until he spent more than 10,000 pounds and he almost got fired.